The chandeliers of the Metropolitan Grand glowed like frozen fire, raining crystals of light over the most powerful men and women in New York. It was the annual Real Estate Titans Gala, a night when fortunes were flaunted, alliances forged, and reputations shattered with nothing more than a whispered rumor. Cameras flashed in relentless bursts as tuxedos and couture gowns shimmered under the spotlight. In the center of this storm stood Damian Westwood, the billionaire mogul who had built half the skyline. With his tall frame, sleek tuxedo, and a smile sharpened into a weapon, he looked every bit the king of the night. But it wasn't his business empire that caught the eyes of every guest. It was the woman clinging to his arm. Roxanne Croft. She was younger, daring, radiant in a crimson gown that clung to her every curve. Her laughter spilled like champagne, loud and reckless, a deliberate contrast to the quiet elegance expected of the wives who usually graced these halls. People whispered, some in admiration, others in disdain, but no one dared say the truth aloud. This was Damian's mistress, flaunted openly as though his real wife did not exist. But his real wife did exist. Elena Carter Westwood stood across the room, her sapphire gown a modest armor stretched over the curve of her 6-month pregnancy. One hand rested instinctively on her belly, the other clutching her small clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had dressed carefully, chosen grace over spectacle, believing that tonight was her chance to prove she still mattered in Damian's world. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, standing beside him with their unborn child would remind him of the vows they once shared. She was wrong. As the orchestra swelled with a triumphant symphony, a ripple of gasps surged through the ballroom. It happened so fast that guests later argued over the details, but the truth was cruelly simple. Roxanne, laughing too hard, leaned back near the edge of the stage where champagne glasses glittered like stars. Her heel caught. She stumbled. A collective breath sucked the air from the room. And Damian moved. Like lightning, like instinct, he lunged, not toward his wife, not toward the woman carrying his child, but toward Roxanne. His strong arms wrapped around her, saving her from crashing onto the marble floor. She clung to him dramatically, pressing her face into his chest as cameras captured every angle of his chivalrous rescue. But in his rush, Damian's arm struck Elena. She staggered backward, her balance already fragile under the weight of her swollen belly. The crowd gasped again, louder this time, as Elena's heel slipped on the slick marble. Her body turned, and before anyone could reach her, she fell against a towering glass sculpture meant to honor the city's skyline. The sound of shattering glass split the music like a gunshot. Shards exploded around her, cascading in a glittering storm as Elena's body crumpled to the floor. Blood bloomed scarlet across her pale skin, mingling with the glass that bit into her arms. For one horrible second, silence. Then chaos. Guests screamed. Phones rose into the air, recording, snapping, capturing the image of a pregnant woman sprawled in broken glass while her husband stood a few feet away, clutching another woman to his chest. Roxanne smiled faintly, her face half hidden, as though savoring the performance. Damian glanced down at Elena, his expression unreadable. But he didn't move. Not immediately. Not fast enough. Elena tried to push herself up, her hand slipping on the slick glass. Pain seared her body, but deeper than pain was the humiliation, the searing knowledge that every eye in the room was on her, not with sympathy, but with pity, with judgment. She saw the flashes, the lenses capturing her shame forever. She tasted iron in her mouth, felt the burn of tears threatening to fall, but she bit them back. She wanted Damian to come, to take one step toward her, to prove, even now, that she still mattered. He didn't. Instead, he adjusted Roxanne in his arms, brushing a strand of her hair tenderly away from her cheek, whispering something that made her laugh again. The orchestra faltered, the violinist missing a note as the audience gawked. Whispers slithered through the air. That's his wife. She's pregnant, my God. And he didn't even help her? Elena's body trembled as security finally rushed to her side. A waiter knelt, offering a napkin far too small for the blood. She looked up, her vision swimming, and locked eyes with Damian. For a fleeting second, something flickered there, not concern. And then he turned away, guiding Roxanne off the stage as though nothing had happened. The humiliation cut deeper than the glass. Every headline tomorrow would scream the truth she already knew. She was no longer Damien Westwood's queen. She was a discarded relic, a pregnant wife sacrificed for a mistress. And as the cameras captured her broken body, Elena felt something inside her snap. Not her bones, not her resolve, but the illusion that she was powerless. The pain was unbearable, but through it burned a new fire, something raw and dangerous. She would not stay broken. She would not be forgotten. This night, this fall, this blood on the ballroom floor would not be her ending. It would be the beginning, because Elena Carter Westwood would rise from these shards of glass, and when she did, she would bring Damien's empire crashing down with her. Elena Carter Westwood had not always been a woman dressed in silk gowns and photographed under the harsh flash of society's cameras. Before her name was bound to Damien Westwood's, she had been simply Elena Carter, a girl from a modest neighborhood in Philadelphia. Her father was a high school teacher, her mother a nurse who often worked double shifts. Their home was small but warm, filled with the sound of late-night laughter, Sunday pancakes, and the creak of worn floorboards that carried the weight of ordinary dreams. Elena grew up believing in hard work, in honesty, in the quiet kind of love that lasted because people chose it every day. She was brilliant, too. From the time she was 8 years old, she would sketch buildings on the backs of grocery receipts, fascinated by the lines and angles of the city skyline. By the time she turned 16, her drawings had grown into full designs, bridges, museums, apartments, all imagined with a precision that shocked even her teachers. Architecture wasn't just a career for Elena. It was her way of shaping the world into something more beautiful, something stronger. She earned a scholarship to Columbia University, where she stood out not just for her talent, but for her humility. While her classmates competed for internships at elite firms, Elena spent weekends volunteering at shelters, sketching designs for affordable housing projects. She didn't want to build towers that touched the clouds just for the wealthy. She wanted to create spaces where families like her own could thrive. And then came Damien. She first met him at a charity exhibition where her student project, an eco-friendly housing model, was being displayed. Damien Westwood, already a rising star in real estate, swept into the room like a storm. His presence was magnetic, his charisma undeniable. He was surrounded by investors and journalists, but his gaze fell on Elena as if she were the only person there. "You designed this?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that never questioned whether it would be heard. "Yes," she replied softly, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. He smiled in a way that felt dangerous even then. "You have vision, and vision deserves to be seen." That night, Damien insisted on walking her home, his stories larger than life. He spoke of skyscrapers he would build, empires he would rule, and the legacy he intended to leave behind. Elena, young and idealistic, was captivated. He made her feel as though she wasn't just a student from a modest background. She was a queen in waiting. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within months, dinners turned into weekend getaways, and weekend getaways turned into an engagement. Damien showered her with gifts she was too shy to accept at first. Diamond earrings, designer gowns, a vintage watch he claimed reminded him of her timelessness. When he proposed under the glittering lights of the Eiffel Tower, Elena said yes, her heart pounding with the certainty that she had found forever. Marriage, however, was not the fairy tale she had envisioned. At first, Damien was attentive, affectionate even. But as his empire grew, so did his hunger. He became consumed by power, by appearances, by the relentless climb up the social ladder. Elena, once his confidant, became his accessory. She was expected to smile at galas, to host perfect dinners, to bear children who would inherit the Westwood legacy. And so she gave. She gave up late nights at the drafting table. She gave up her dream of opening her own firm. She gave up her name, her identity, her independence, all for a man who promised she was the center of his world. When she learned she was pregnant, Elena thought things might change. She imagined Damien softening, returning to the man who once walked her home and told her she had vision. For a brief moment, she believed she had found a piece of that old love when Damien kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're going to build a family, Elena." But the sweetness didn't last. Pregnancy made her slower, weaker in Damien's eyes. He criticized her for gaining too much weight, for being too tired to attend every event, for choosing flats instead of heels when her ankles swelled. He reminded her constantly of the money he spent, the image he maintained, and the sacrifices he made. And though Elena's heart broke each time, she told herself it was just stress, just pressure. If she was patient, if she endured, love would return. Yet love didn't return. Instead, there was Roxanne. Elena had noticed the changes first in whispers. The late nights, the lingering perfume on Damien's suits, the sudden urgency of business trips that didn't match his calendar. When she asked, he dismissed her, accusing her of being paranoid, emotional, too hormonal to think clearly. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the man she married still existed beneath the cold exterior. But deep down, she knew. And still, she chose silence. Not for herself, but for the baby. She told herself that once their child was born, Damien would remember what truly mattered. She held on to hope like a lifeline, even as it cut into her hands. That hope shattered the night of the gala. The moment Damien chose to save Roxanne instead of her, every illusion Elena had clung to disintegrated. The humiliation was unbearable, but it also carved something new inside her. Pain gave way to anger, and anger gave way to resolve. In the sterile quiet of the hospital where she was treated for her wounds, Elena stared at the ceiling, one hand resting over the steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat. For years, she had given up everything for Damien, believing her sacrifice meant something. Now she understood the truth. Damien had taken her love, her dreams, her loyalty, and he had thrown them away. But what he didn't realize was that Elena Carter Westwood was not just a wife. She was not just a pregnant woman sprawled in broken glass. She was a fighter, a visionary, a woman who had rebuilt herself once before and could do it again. And this time she would not rebuild for him. She would rebuild to destroy him. Because somewhere in the shadows, an ally was waiting. Someone powerful enough to give her the weapon she needed to strike back. And when that ally revealed himself, Damien would learn that the woman he discarded was the very woman who could end him. The Metropolitan Grand Hotel was not just a venue. It was a monument to excess, a temple of glass and gold, where the city's elite gathered to worship the gods of wealth and power. Tonight, its grand ballroom pulsed with music, laughter, and the subtle tension of deals whispered over champagne flutes. Crystal chandeliers descended like frozen waterfalls, casting prisms of light onto marble floors, polished until they gleamed like mirrors. The air was thick with the mingling perfumes of designer fragrances, so heavy it clung to the lungs. Waiters in white gloves moved like chess pieces, balancing trays of caviar and vintage champagne as though the very future of society depended on their precision. Everywhere Elena looked, there were masks. Not literal ones, but the kind worn by men and women who had mastered the art of pretending. Smiles were too bright, laughter too rehearsed, compliments laced with venom beneath their polished delivery. This was the jungle of the elite, where reputations could be shattered by a glance and alliances sealed by a single clink of crystal. Damien thrived in this world. He didn't just belong here, he ruled it. Every step he took drew attention. Every word he spoke seemed to ripple outward like a decree. Elena remembered when she had admired that about him, when she had believed his confidence was strength. Now she saw it for what it truly was. Hunger. A hunger that could never be satisfied. Across the room, Roxanne leaned into Damien's side, her crimson dress blazing like a warning signal. She belonged here in a different way. Flashy, bold, the kind of beauty that demanded notice. Men watched her with admiration, women with disdain. But she drank it all in, basking in the attention as though it were her birthright. The irony, Elena thought bitterly, was that she had once believed her own place at Damien's side was secure. She had imagined herself as his partner, his equal, the woman who would help him shape the empire he dreamed of. Yet here she was, reduced to a shadow on the edge of the ballroom, clutching her swollen belly while her husband paraded another woman like a trophy. The orchestra shifted into a sweeping waltz, and couples glided across the dance floor, their movements practiced and elegant. Elena's heart clenched as she watched Damien lead Roxanne into the center, spinning her with a flourish as if the two of them had rehearsed this performance 1,000 times. The crowd erupted in polite applause, murmurs buzzing like bees through the air. "Magnificent," someone whispered behind Elena. "The Westwoods always steal the show." The words burned. The Westwoods. As though she were no longer part of that name, as though Damien and Roxanne had replaced her already. She felt invisible, erased. Yet at the same time, she knew eyes were on her too. Pitying eyes, judgmental eyes, hungry eyes waiting for her to break so they could feast on the spectacle of her downfall. Her hand drifted to her belly. The baby kicked softly, as if reminding her that she was not just a discarded wife. She was a mother, carrying a future Damien had chosen to forget. A wave of nausea washed over her. She moved toward the balcony, desperate for air. The heavy doors opened onto a terrace lined with marble columns, the city glittering beyond like 1,000 watchful eyes. She gripped the railing, breathing deeply, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. But even here, whispers followed her. A pair of women in sequined gowns passed by, their voices hushed but not hushed enough. She looks exhausted. Pregnant and abandoned. It's pathetic, really. I heard Damien is planning to divorce her. Roxanne is the future. Their laughter was cruel, slicing through Elena's heart. She turned away, hiding her face in the shadows. For the first time that evening, she wondered if she should have stayed home, if enduring this humiliation was worth it. Then, a voice interrupted her despair. "Elena?" She turned, startled. Standing a few feet away was Ethan Blackwell, the enigmatic CEO whose reputation rivaled Damien's. Unlike Damien, Ethan avoided the spotlight, preferring quiet power over public spectacle. Tonight, however, he was here, tall and imposing in his tailored black tuxedo, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said softly. Elena tried to summon a polite smile, the kind she had mastered after years in Damien's world. "It's my duty, I suppose." Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering on the faint cut along her arm where glass had pierced her earlier. "You shouldn't have to endure this," he murmured, almost to himself. Before Elena could reply, the crowd inside erupted in gasps. She spun back toward the ballroom just in time to see Roxanne stumble on the edge of the stage, Damien rushing to catch her. The moment replayed in slow motion, every eye in the room fixated on the tableau of the billionaire saving his mistress. And then came Elena's fall, the shattering glass, the humiliation that would define her life. Ethan's jaw tightened as he watched the scene unfold. He took a step forward, as though to move toward Elena, but the swarm of cameras and gasps held him back. Instead, he stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, his expression unreadable. The world inside the ballroom had erupted into chaos, but outside, on the balcony, Elena's mind was already shifting. Beneath the pain and humiliation, something sharp began to form, a seed of determination, a whisper of revenge. And though no one knew it yet, the man standing in the shadows, Ethan Blackwell, would soon become the unexpected ally who would change everything. Damien Westwood had always been a man who understood spectacle. To him, appearances were not just important, they were currency. Power in his world was not built on truth, but on perception, on how effectively he could command a room, silence rivals with a glance, and make people believe he was untouchable. And tonight, in the glittering ballroom of the Metropolitan Grand, he orchestrated his cruelest spectacle yet. With Roxanne Croft clinging to his arm like a prize he had won, Damien radiated triumph. He had saved her, pulled her into his embrace as the crowd gasped, and now he paraded her across the marble floor like a trophy no one else could claim. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts, capturing his smug smile, her grateful gaze, and the undeniable chemistry between them. To the untrained eye, it looked like romance. To those who knew the truth, it was betrayal flaunted in the harshest light. Elena, still trembling from her fall, could only watch from where she sat on a velvet chair near the edge of the ballroom, her body aching, her heart in pieces. Yet Damien didn't glance her way, not even once. Instead, he leaned down to whisper something into Roxanne's ear, and she threw her head back in laughter, loud enough for everyone to hear. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Damien wanted the world to see that his loyalty, his affection, his future no longer belonged to the pregnant wife who bore his name. It belonged to Roxanne. Guests whispered behind gloved hands. Some looked horrified, others intrigued, but Damien fed on the attention, his arrogance growing with each stare. He thrived in scandal because scandal kept him relevant. He believed no matter how many rules he broke, his power and wealth would shield him from consequence. "Roxanne?" He said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "You're the only reason I survived tonight." Roxanne beamed, her crimson lips curving into a satisfied smirk. "You saved me, Damien. You always do." The words were like daggers to Elena's chest. She had spent years saving him, saving his image, his reputation, his sanity when business collapsed under the weight of risky deals. She had held him at night when stress threatened to break him, whispered encouragement when rivals circled like wolves. Yet in front of this room, he handed her role to another woman without hesitation. As the orchestra resumed, Damien guided Roxanne into a slow dance. The lights dimmed, and for a moment it seemed the world revolved around them. He bent low, his lips brushing her ear, his hand dangerously close to the curve of her hip. She leaned into him, her eyes flicking toward Elena with a look of victory that needed no words. Elena's stomach twisted, nausea rising not just from her pregnancy, but from the public humiliation pressing down on her. She clutched her clutch tighter, nails biting into the leather, forcing herself to stay upright even as tears threatened to blur her vision. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not here. Not tonight. Across the room, Damien's business associates watched with thinly veiled unease. They were men who thrived on appearances as much as Damien did, and even they understood the risk of such a brazen display. But Damien didn't care. He had convinced himself he was invincible. "Doesn't he realize the damage this could do?" one investor muttered. Another shrugged. "He doesn't think anyone can touch him." And maybe they were right. Damien had always been ruthless in business, crushing competitors, buying silence, erasing scandals before they grew teeth. To him, Elena's pain was not a liability, it was collateral. He believed she had no power to fight back, but in that belief lay his greatest mistake. For Elena was not the fragile woman he imagined. Not anymore. From her seat, Helena's gaze hardened. The humiliation burned, yes, but beneath it something else stirred. Rage. A cold, steady rage that numbed her pain and steadied her breath. She watched Damien twirl Roxanne, watched his arrogant grin, and silently vowed this would not be the final chapter of her story. Damien might think he had broken her. He might believe she was powerless, too weak to fight. But Elena had once built dreams from nothing, carved a path from a modest home to the heart of Manhattan's elite. She would build again. Not for Damien this time, but against him. And when she did, she would make sure the empire he valued more than anything crumbled into dust. As the dance ended, Damien led Roxanne toward the head table, deliberately passing by Elena's chair. For a brief second, their eyes met. Elena's heart hammered. Would he acknowledge her? Offer even a shred of remorse? No, Damien smirked, a cruel twist of his lips, and leaned down to Roxanne. "Some women can't keep up," he murmured just loud enough for Elena to hear. "That's why they get left behind." Roxanne laughed, and Damien straightened, continuing toward the table without another glance. Elena's nails dug into her palm. The sting of glass in her skin had been sharp, but this wound cut deeper. His words confirmed what she already knew. In his mind, she was disposable. But in that moment, she made a silent promise to herself and to the child growing inside her. She would not be left behind. Damien thought he had won tonight. He thought the spectacle had secured Roxanne's place and erased Elena's. But he was wrong. Because while Damien Westwood flaunted his mistress and basked in his false victory, forces were already moving in the shadows, forces that would soon align with Elena and expose every secret he fought to bury. The sound of shattering glass didn't just echo in the ballroom. It ripped through the carefully constructed illusions of Elena Carter Westwood's life. For a second, the orchestra froze mid-note, the violin's bowstrings trembling in silence. Guests gasped, hands covering jeweled mouths, their eyes wide with the thrill of scandal. Elena lay sprawled across the floor, glass shards glittering around her like jagged stars. Blood welled along her arm, dripping down her pale skin, staining her sapphire gown. The pain was sharp, but the humiliation cut deeper. In her mind, she could already hear the headlines being written. Billionaire's pregnant wife falls in public scene. Westwood wife overshadowed by mistress. And through it all, Damien stood only a few feet away, holding Roxanne Croft protectively in his arms. Not once did he move toward Elena. Not once did he kneel beside her or call her name. Instead, his focus remained fixed on Roxanne. brushing a strand of hair from her face with the tenderness Elena had once thought belonged to her. The whispers spread like wildfire through the ballroom. "Did you see? He caught the mistress, not the wife. She's bleeding, and he doesn't even care. My God, she's pregnant." Phones were out now, lenses flashing, recording every second. Some tried to shield Elena from the cameras, but most leaned in, eager to capture the image that would dominate social media by morning. Elena struggled to sit up, her palms slipping against the slick floor. Security guards finally rushed forward, lifting her gently, guiding her to a chair at the edge of the room. A waiter offered a napkin, his hand trembling as though afraid of being caught in the drama. But even seated, even with blood dripping from her arm and pain searing through her body, Elena's eyes were locked on Damien. She searched his face for any sign of regret, of concern. She wanted him to come to her, to prove that somewhere inside the ruthless businessman was still the man she had once loved. Instead, Damien leaned closer to Roxanne and whispered something that made her laugh again. It was then that Elena understood. He wasn't just indifferent. He was choosing to humiliate her. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate erasure. And the cameras caught every second. By the time Elena was escorted to a waiting room, her humiliation had already gone viral. Within minutes, Twitter lit up with hashtags: Glassfall, Westwood Drama, Mistress Saved Wife Forgotten. Clips of Damien saving Roxanne while Elena fell replayed endlessly, each replay twisting the knife deeper. One clip, slowed down and set to dramatic music, spread fastest. Elena's wide eyes as she fell, Damien's strong arms around Roxanne, the cruel juxtaposition of rescue and abandonment. Millions of strangers dissected her pain as entertainment. The online commentary was merciless. She should have stayed home. Pregnant women don't belong at galas. Roxanne is stunning. Damien made the right choice. Imagine your husband saving another woman while you bleed. Couldn't be me. Elena's name trended, but not as a respected architect or devoted wife. She became a meme, reduced to a punchline in a scandal she never asked for. At the hospital later that night, Elena sat alone in a sterile white room, her arm bandaged, her gown replaced with a thin cotton robe. The baby was safe, the doctors reassured her, though the stress had taken its toll. But relief did little to soothe the storm inside her chest. She scrolled through the endless stream of videos and comments, her heart pounding with every cruel word. For years, she had supported Damien, sacrificed her career, her identity, her dreams. And this was her reward: public humiliation, broadcast to the world, while her husband held another woman in his arms. Tears blurred her vision, hot and relentless. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering softly, "I'm so sorry, little one. I thought your father would love us. I was wrong." But even in that moment of despair, something hardened inside her. If Damien thought this night would break her, he was mistaken. This night would become the turning point. Across the city, Damien and Roxanne were still basking in the aftermath of the gala, celebrating at a private after-party filled with sycophants too eager to please. Laughter, champagne, the clink of glasses, all while Elena's humiliation fueled gossip columns and tabloid headlines. Yet even as Damien grinned, reveling in the attention, cracks had begun to form in his empire. Investors whispered doubts, journalists dug deeper, rivals circled. The scandal that boosted his ego also painted him as reckless, heartless, a dangerous liability in the world of billion-dollar deals. And somewhere in the shadows, Ethan Blackwell watched closely. He had seen Elena's fall, seen Damien's betrayal, and though he had remained silent, he hadn't forgotten. Unlike Damien, Ethan understood power was not just about spectacle. It was about timing. And he knew Elena's time was coming. Back in the hospital, Elena wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to herself words she hadn't spoken in years. "I am not weak." She thought of the girl she once was, the architect with dreams, the woman with vision. That girl wasn't gone. She had been buried under years of sacrifice, of compromise, of silence. But tonight had shattered the illusion. And from those shards, she would rise again. Damien had given her a gift he didn't realize: freedom. The freedom to stop pretending. The freedom to stop clinging to love that no longer existed. The freedom to fight back. The humiliation would not be the end of her story. It would be the weapon she used to rewrite it. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Elena stared out the hospital window, her reflection faint against the rising sun. Her body was bruised, her heart scarred, but her resolve was stronger than ever. And when the world least expected it, Elena Carter Westwood would strike back, and Damien would regret the night he chose to let her fall. The days after the gala blurred into one another, heavy and suffocating, as though Elena had fallen not only into glass but into a pit of endless shadows. Her body healed faster than her spirit. The bruises faded, the bandages came off, but the humiliation lingered, carved into her like a scar no doctor could erase. Every time she turned on her phone, the world reminded her of her fall. The viral clips, the mocking memes, the cruel commentary, her pain replayed on loop for millions to consume. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself she didn't care what strangers thought, but it was impossible to escape. The supermarket cashier who avoided her eyes, the neighbor who whispered into her phone as Elena passed. Even the nurses at her prenatal checkup exchanged glances when her name was called. She had become infamous, not for her talent, not for her sacrifices, but for being the wife who fell while her husband saved another woman. And Damien never called. Not once. Not a message, not a visit, not even a cold acknowledgement. It was as if she had ceased to exist in his world the moment glass shattered around her. He continued attending parties with Roxanne, their photos splashed across tabloids, laughing, kissing, glowing under the spotlight. The captions twisted the knife deeper. Damien and Roxanne, New York's new power couple. Elena would lie awake at night, one hand pressed to her belly, tears burning her eyes. The silence of the penthouse, once luxurious, now felt like a prison echoing with ghosts of a love she had lost. She stared at the empty side of the bed, remembering the nights she had curled against Damien's chest, believing his promises. Now that space belonged to another woman. The loneliness was unbearable. She stopped eating for days, surviving on tea and water, her appetite stolen by grief. Her mother called, her voice filled with concern, but Elena brushed her off. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." She couldn't bring herself to admit the truth, that she was drowning. Even the baby's kicks, once a source of joy, became a reminder of her entrapment. She whispered apologies into the night, guilt gnawing at her. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. I'm sorry your father doesn't care." One afternoon, after yet another headline mocked her, Elena crumpled to the floor of the nursery. The room was half finished, walls painted a soft cream, a crib still in its box, stuffed animals lined neatly on the dresser. She had poured her heart into preparing a sanctuary for her child. Now it felt like a cruel joke. She curled on the carpet, sobbing into her hands, her swollen belly pressing against her knees. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to keep going." For the first time in her life, Elena felt completely broken. The world outside didn't pause for her grief. The stock market ticked on. Damien's empire grew louder. Roxanne's Instagram followers skyrocketed. And Elena disappeared, fading into the margins of a story she had once believed was her own. The breaking point came late one night. She sat by the window, staring at the glittering skyline. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, hair unkempt, skin pale. She barely recognized herself. A news alert buzzed on her phone. Damien Westwood announces engagement to Roxanne Croft. Engagement. Her breath caught, her chest constricted, and for a moment she thought she might suffocate. He hadn't even divorced her yet, and already he flaunted his plans to marry another. Tears blurred the city lights, turning them into smears of fire. She whispered aloud, "How could you do this to me? To us?" Her voice cracked, the words swallowed by the vast silence of the penthouse. Her hand trembled as she reached for the drawer of the bedside table. Inside, untouched since her college days, was a leather-bound sketchbook. She flipped through the pages, old designs of homes, parks, bridges, visions of a world she once wanted to build. Each drawing was a ghost of the girl she had been, full of hope, unbroken by betrayal. Looking at those pages, something inside her stirred. For weeks she had let herself believe Damien's cruelty defined her. She had let the world laugh while she disappeared. But as she traced the lines of her own work, she remembered who she was before him. She was Elena Carter, the architect, the dreamer, the fighter. And if she could build once, she could build again. The thought didn't erase the pain, but it gave her something else, a flicker of resolve. For the first time since the gala, she felt the faintest spark of strength. But strength would not come easily. The next morning, when she finally left the penthouse to buy groceries, paparazzi swarmed. Flashes blinded her. Voices shouted cruel questions. "Elena, do you regret attending the gala? Are you jealous of Roxanne? Does Damien still support you financially?" She froze, her heart racing, clutching her belly protectively. Strangers watched from the sidewalk, some snapping photos on their phones, others whispering. Her cheeks burned with shame. A woman passing by sneered, "Should have kept her husband happy." That broke her. She stumbled back into the car, tears streaming down her face, shaking with rage and humiliation. That night, alone again, she whispered to her unborn child, "We will survive this. I don't know how yet, but we will." And just as she spoke those words, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Elena, I saw what he did. Meet me tomorrow, things you need to know. E.B. E.B. Ethan Blackwell." Her heart pounded. Damien's most dangerous rival, a man with power, resources, and secrets. She stared at the message, torn between fear and hope. And for the first time, Elena realized that maybe she wasn't as alone or as powerless as Damien wanted her to believe. Elena Carter Westwood could not sleep the night she received the message. The words glowed on her phone screen, simple yet earth-shattering. "Elena, I saw what he did. Meet me tomorrow. There are things you need to know, E.B." She read it a dozen times, her mind racing. Ethan Blackwell. A man as powerful as Damien, maybe more. His empire was vast, his influence whispered about in corridors where deals worth billions were made. But unlike Damien, Ethan was elusive. A phantom in the press. He rarely gave interviews, never flaunted his wealth, never paraded women on his arm. He was the opposite of Damien in every way, and also his most dangerous rival. Why would Ethan reach out to her? What could he possibly want with a woman the world now mocked as broken and discarded? By dawn, exhaustion had overtaken her. But when she awoke, the decision was clear. She had nothing left to lose. That afternoon, she met him at a quiet cafe on the Upper East Side. The place was discreet, far from paparazzi and society gossip. Ethan was already there, seated at a corner table. His presence was commanding, yet understated. He wore a simple navy suit, no flashy watch, no entourage. But his eyes, sharp, calculating, almost unsettling, seemed to see right through her. "Elena," he said softly as she sat down, "I'm sorry for what happened to you." The sincerity in his tone startled her. She had grown so accustomed to empty sympathy, people whispering condolences while secretly reveling in her downfall, that real compassion felt foreign. "You didn't call me here just to say that," she replied cautiously. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "No. I called you because you deserve to know the truth about Damien." Elena's chest tightened. "What truth?" Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Your husband is not just a philanderer. He's a criminal. He has been laundering money through shell corporations for years. He's stolen millions from investors, manipulated land deals, and paid off officials to bury the evidence." Elena blinked, stunned. She had suspected Damien of many things: selfishness, arrogance, betrayal. But this was something else entirely. "You're saying he's corrupt?" "Worse," Ethan said. "He's reckless. He believes he's untouchable. But I have the evidence that proves otherwise. Emails, bank transfers, offshore accounts, enough to destroy him." Her breath caught. "Then why haven't you gone public?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Because timing is everything. If I expose him too soon, he'll spin the narrative, paint himself as the victim, and bury the story under a mountain of lies. I need someone who can deliver the blow at the right moment. Someone the public already sees as his victim. Someone like you." The weight of his words settled over her like a storm. He was offering her not just justice, but revenge. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "I'm pregnant. I'm already broken." "No," Ethan said firmly, his gaze locking onto hers. "You're not broken. You're wounded, and wounds heal. What you are, Elena, is dangerous to him, because you know his weaknesses, because you represent everything he threw away, and because when you rise, you'll prove to the world that Damien Westwood isn't without the woman he discarded." Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat back into the safety of silence. But another part, the part that had sketched buildings on grocery receipts, the part that had dreamed of shaping worlds, burned with new fire. "What would I have to do?" she asked finally. Ethan leaned back, his voice calm but deliberate. "You don't need to lift a finger. I'll give you the evidence. When the time is right, you present it, In public, at one of his precious galas perhaps. The same stage he used to humiliate you. You'll use to destroy him. Elena's hands trembled around her teacup. The image was intoxicating. Damien, stripped of power, exposed as a fraud, his empire crumbling in front of the same people who once applauded him. But fear gnawed at her. And if he retaliates, he'll come after me. He always does. Ethan's gaze softened for the first time. He won't touch you, not while I'm here. There it was, the other truth she hadn't expected. Ethan wasn't just offering justice. He was offering protection. Perhaps more. She felt the unspoken weight of his words, the way his eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. She shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Ethan reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Inside is enough to bury him. Look at it when you're ready. But remember, Elena, this is your choice, no one else's. Her fingers hovered over the folder, her pulse quickening. This was it. The key to her revenge, her salvation, her freedom. But it was also dangerous. Once she crossed this line, there would be no going back. That night, alone in her penthouse, she opened the folder. Page after page of documents confirmed Ethan's words. Bank records showing transfers to offshore accounts, emails where Damien ordered bribes and cover-ups, photos of him meeting with shadowy figures in private jets and hotel suites. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of Damien's empire. Tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow, but from rage. She had given everything to this man. Her love, her loyalty, her body, her child, and all along he had not only betrayed her, but built his empire on lies. She pressed a hand to her belly. "I'll make him pay," she whispered. "For both of us." Her resolve hardened. She would not let Damien win. She would not let her child grow up in his shadow. But as she closed the folder, a chill ran down her spine, because buried at the very back was something she hadn't expected. A photograph. Damien and Roxanne. Not just together, but in Damien's office. Roxanne seated at Elena's desk, papers spread before her. Ethan had scrawled a note beneath it. "She knows more than you think. Be careful." Elena's breath hitched. So Roxanne wasn't just a mistress. She was involved in Damien's schemes, perhaps even complicit. The betrayal cut deeper than she imagined, and it meant the battle ahead would be fiercer, more dangerous than she had prepared for. Still, one thing was certain. The woman Damien left bleeding on the ballroom floor would be the same woman who tore his empire apart. And now, she had the weapon to do it. The folder from Ethan Blackwell stayed on Elena's nightstand for days, like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. Each morning she woke up, her eyes landed on it. Each night she whispered to herself, "Not yet." But with every passing hour, the fire inside her grew hotter. The humiliation of the gala had shattered her illusions. The folder gave her clarity, but what she needed now was strength. Strength to stop being the woman Damien had reduced her to, weak, silent, erased, and to become someone new. The first step was shedding her fear. Elena stood before the mirror one morning, staring at the pale, exhausted woman staring back. Her once glossy hair hung limp. Her skin was sallow, her eyes ringed with shadows. She barely recognized herself. This was what Damien's betrayal had done. Broken her spirit, dulled her shine. But no more. She reached for the scissors in her drawer. With trembling hands, she cut. Long strands fell to the floor, each snip a release of the past. By the time she finished, her reflection was different. Shorter, sharper, freer. A woman who no longer clung to the version of herself Damien had controlled. The next step was reclaiming her identity. She called an old professor from Columbia, a mentor who had once told her she had the talent to change skylines. "I want to return to work," Elena said. "Not just as a wife, not as his shadow, but as me." Within a week, she was sketching again, consulting on small projects. At first, her hand shook as she held the pencil, but with each line, her confidence returned. She wasn't just drawing buildings, she was rebuilding herself. Still, she knew talent alone wasn't enough. To face Damien, she needed armor. That's where Ethan stepped in. One evening, he arrived at her penthouse with a garment bag. "You'll need this soon," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a gown, black silk, tailored to perfection, elegant yet commanding. Not the delicate dresses she had worn to please Damien. This was different. This was power stitched into fabric. "Why are you helping me?" Elena asked, her voice cautious. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Because Damien thinks he's untouchable." "But no man is untouchable. not when he underestimates the woman standing against him. For the first time in months, Elena smiled, not out of politeness, not to cover her pain, but because she believed him. And so, piece by piece, she transformed. She began attending small networking events, not as Damien's wife, but as Elena Carter, the architect. At first, people whispered, but soon they listened. Her insights on design, her vision for sustainable housing, her calm yet commanding presence. Slowly, the narrative shifted. She was no longer just the wife who had fallen at the gala. She was a woman rising again. The tabloids noticed. Elena Carter Westwood steps out in stunning black ensemble. Discarded wife turns heads at industry event. From victim to visionary, Elena Carter's remarkable return. Each headline felt like a step forward, a piece of her dignity reclaimed. But transformation wasn't just about appearances. It was about mindset. At night, Elena sat with Ethan, studying the folder. He walked her through Damien's crimes, explaining each forged document, each illicit transfer. The more she learned, the stronger she felt. Damien had built his empire on lies, but Elena was learning how to dismantle it. "You're not just fighting for revenge," Ethan reminded her one evening. "You're fighting for your future, for your child's future. Don't forget that." His words anchored her. This wasn't just about humiliating Damien, it was about building a life where her child would grow up proud of their mother. One afternoon, Elena stood in front of her unfinished nursery, staring at the crib still in its box. She picked up a paintbrush and began to work. Each stroke of soft blue across the walls felt symbolic, a promise to her baby that no matter what happened, they would be safe, loved, and raised by a mother who refused to be defeated. When the room was finished, Elena stood back and whispered, "We'll be okay, I promise." Her transformation was nearly complete. The final step came when she accepted Ethan's invitation to a private gala hosted by one of New York's most influential investors. She walked into the room wearing the black silk gown he had given her. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Cameras flashed, not in mockery, but in awe. She wasn't the broken wife anymore. She was radiant, powerful, untouchable. Across the room, Elena caught sight of Damien and Roxanne. They froze, their smug smiles faltering. For the first time, Damien's eyes widened, not with indifference, but with something else: recognition. Fear. Elena held his gaze, her chin high, her posture strong. She didn't flinch, she didn't look away. For once, Damien was the one left unsettled. She mingled with ease, shaking hands, discussing projects, commanding attention with her quiet confidence. Investors who had once dismissed her as the wife now leaned in to hear her ideas. By the end of the night, she had secured meetings, partnerships, opportunities that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. Ethan approached her as the evening wound down. "You see now," he said softly, "you don't need Damien's name. You never did." Elena smiled faintly. "But I'll use it, one last time, to end him." Her transformation was complete. She was no longer Damien's victim. She was the storm on his horizon. And soon, she would strike. Because the next gala, the one Damien believed would cement his dominance, was where Elena planned to expose everything. And this time, the world wouldn't see her fall. They'd see him burn. The night of the Global Real Estate Summit arrived, and New York shimmered like a jewel under 1,000 lights. The city buzzed with anticipation. For weeks, the press had whispered about Damien Westwood's upcoming keynote speech, an announcement that, according to leaks, would secure his dominance over the industry for decades to come. He had chosen the Waldorf Grand Ballroom as his stage, a venue dripping with history and luxury. The chandeliers sparkled, the marble floors gleamed, and the air crackled with ambition. Politicians, billionaires, media tycoons, everyone who mattered was there. This wasn't just an event, it was a coronation. And Damien Westwood, dressed in a flawless Tom Ford tuxedo, looked every bit the king he believed himself to be. On his arm, Roxanne Croft glowed in a crimson gown, the same shade she had worn the night Elena fell into glass. Her smile was polished, her hand possessive on Damien's sleeve. Cameras flashed as they entered, reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Westwood, is tonight your biggest announcement yet?" "Roxanne, how does it feel to stand beside the man of the hour?" Damien grinned, basking in the attention. "Tonight," he declared, "we make history." But history was already being written, just not the way he imagined. Because across the room, entering quietly, was Elena Carter Westwood. She wore the black silk gown Ethan had given her, her hair sleek, her posture regal. No cameras had been tipped off to her arrival. But as she walked into the ballroom, conversations stopped. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. That's her, the wife. She looks different. Elena's presence was magnetic, undeniable. She no longer looked broken, she looked untouchable. Damien's eyes found her across the room, and for the first time in years his smile faltered. Roxanne followed his gaze, her lips tightening as jealousy flared. Elena didn't flinch. She met Damien's stare with cool defiance, then turned away, as though he were nothing more than an inconvenience. The evening unfolded with its usual charade, champagne toasts, networking, speeches, but beneath the glittering surface, tension brewed. Elena moved gracefully from group to group, shaking hands with investors, exchanging quiet words with journalists, all while Ethan lingered nearby, a silent sentinel, ensuring she was never alone. And then, at last, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed, and Damien strode to the podium, his confidence radiating. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming through the hall. "Tonight, we unveil the future of real estate, Westwood International's expansion into global markets. This is not just growth, it is destiny." Applause thundered. Cameras rolled. Damien soaked it in, spreading his arms like a man blessing his kingdom. And then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. "Destiny built on lies." The hall fell silent. Every head turned. Elena stepped forward, her heels clicking against marble, her black gown flowing like liquid shadow. She held a folder in her hands, the same folder Ethan had given her. Damien's face drained of color. "Elena," he spat, his voice sharp. "Sit down, you're embarrassing yourself." But Elena didn't stop. She mounted the small staircase, her presence commanding. She turned to the audience, her voice steady, strong. "My name is Elena Carter Westwood. For years I stood by this man. I believed in him. I sacrificed my dreams, my identity, my dignity. And this is how he repaid me, by betraying me, humiliating me, discarding me. But tonight I am not here as his wife. I am here as the woman who will tell you the truth." Gasps rippled through the room. Elena opened the folder and held up the first page. Emails, bank records, proof that Damien Westwood has been laundering money through offshore accounts for years. Murmurs erupted. She turned another page. Bribes to government officials to secure illegal land deals. The crowd shifted uneasily, phones raised, cameras flashing. Another page. Fraudulent contracts, stolen funds, embezzlement. This is the empire Damien Westwood built. Not on vision, not on innovation, but on corruption and lies. Damien slammed his hand against the podium. "Lies, all of it. She's a bitter woman trying to destroy me because I left her. Don't believe a word she says." But Elena was ready. She held up a USB drive. "And here," she said calmly, "is the digital evidence. Verified, time-stamped, undeniable. It's already been sent to the press. Even as we speak, the truth is spreading across every major outlet." The room erupted. Journalists bolted for the exits. Phones buzzed with breaking news alerts. Investors whispered furiously, some already distancing themselves, others glaring at Damien as though he had poisoned them. Elena turned her gaze back to him. "You thought you broke me. You thought I would stay silent. But tonight, Damien, the world sees you for what you are. And it's not a king, it's a fraud." Roxanne's face paled. She looked at Damien, her mask of confidence cracking. For the first time, she realized the man she clung to wasn't invincible. He was finished. Damien's fists clenched, his face red with rage. "You'll regret this, Elena. You'll regret the day you turned against me." But Elena only smiled faintly. "No, Damien. The only thing I regret is wasting so many years believing you deserved me." The audience gasped, applause breaking out, scattered at first, then swelling into thunder. Some stood, clapping, cheering her courage. Others stared in stunned silence, their faith in Damien collapsing before their eyes. Elena stepped down from the stage, her head high, her steps steady. She walked past Damien without looking at him, the sound of applause echoing in her ears. Damien shouted after her, his voice cracking. "This isn't over." But it was. Everyone knew it. Still, as Elena reached the exit, she felt Ethan's steady hand at her back, guiding her through the chaos. And in the corner of her vision, she saw Roxanne slip out a side door, her phone pressed to her ear, her expression cold. Because while Damien's empire crumbled tonight, Elena realized one truth too late. Roxanne wasn't finished. And the war was far from over. The fallout was immediate. By morning, Damian Westwood's name, once synonymous with power, was plastered across every front page in the country. But this time, the headlines weren't about his empire or his glamour. They were about fraud, corruption, betrayal. Damian Westwood exposed. Wife reveals billion-dollar scandal. From king to criminal, the fall of a real estate titan. Pregnant wife becomes hero in public showdown. Every news outlet replayed Elena's speech from the gala. Her words, clear and unwavering, spread across the world. Strangers who had once mocked her now praised her courage. Women sent messages calling her an inspiration. Men confessed she had reminded them of the power of dignity and truth. Elena Carter Westwood was no longer just the woman who fell into glass. She was the woman who shattered an empire. Damian, meanwhile, spiraled. His investors withdrew, one by one, like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Contracts dissolved, banks froze his accounts, and within days, federal investigators announced an inquiry. The evidence Elena presented was undeniable. The man who had once walked through ballrooms like a king was now hounded by reporters outside courtrooms, his face pale, his arrogance gone. Roxanne Croft, his so-called queen, disappeared from his side almost instantly. The same tabloids that once celebrated their romance now splashed her betrayal across glossy covers. Mistress runs, billionaire stands alone. For Elena, however, the days after the gala were strangely quiet. She spent them preparing for her baby, painting the last touches of the nursery, folding tiny clothes into drawers. For the first time in months, she felt peace. The storm was still raging around Damian, but for her, the air was finally clearing. And yet, healing wasn't instant. Nights were still hard. Sometimes she woke in a panic, the sound of shattering glass echoing in her dreams. But when that happened, she pressed a hand to her belly, whispering to her child, "We're safe now. He can't hurt us anymore." The world, however, wasn't finished with her. Reporters camped outside her building, begging for interviews. TV producers offered book deals, talk shows promised airtime, but Elena declined them all. She didn't need to shout louder. She had already said what needed to be said. What she wanted now was a life, not as Damian's wife, not as the woman scorned, but as Elena Carter. One afternoon, she received a call from the Dean of Columbia's School of Architecture. "Your story inspired our students," he said warmly. "We'd like to invite you to give a lecture, to remind them that architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about strength, and you embody that strength." Elena accepted. Standing before the class a week later, she told her story, not about Damian, not about scandal, but about resilience, about how vision could rebuild even the most broken foundations. Her students applauded, some with tears in their eyes, and Elena realized something profound. She hadn't just regained her voice. She had found a new purpose. Meanwhile, Damian's downfall deepened. When the trial began, Elena sat quietly in the courtroom, not for revenge, but for closure. She listened as prosecutors laid out his crimes, as witnesses testified, as evidence stacked higher and higher. Damian tried to glare at her from across the room, but his eyes no longer held power. His suits hung looser, his posture slouched. And when the judge read the verdict, guilty on multiple counts, Elena felt no triumph, only release. He was no longer her burden. The man who had once left her bleeding in glass would now live behind bars, stripped of everything he valued. After the sentencing, reporters swarmed her again. "Elena, how does it feel to see him fall?" She answered simply, "Justice was never about watching him fall. It was about making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. Now I can finally move on." And move on she did. Months later, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. As she held him in her arms, tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of joy. She whispered his name, chosen long ago when hope still flickered, Gabriel, her angel, her reason. The nurses smiled, Ethan waiting quietly in the corner of the room. He had been there throughout her pregnancy's final months, steady, protective, never overstepping. He offered help without demand, guidance without control. When Elena looked at him now, holding her child, she saw not just an ally, but the possibility of something more. She wasn't ready for love, not yet, but for the first time, she believed it could exist again. Weeks later, she took Gabriel for a walk in Central Park. Strangers smiled, some recognizing her, some not. A woman stopped her, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "You showed me I don't have to stay with someone who doesn't value me. Because of you, I left." I'm free now. Elena's throat tightened. She squeezed the woman's hand, realizing that her story had become more than revenge. It had become hope for countless others. As the sun set over the park, Elena whispered to her son, "This is our new beginning, and we'll live it on our terms." Back at home, she opened her old sketchbook once more. She began to draw. Not skyscrapers this time, but homes. Warm, inviting, filled with love. Spaces not for power, but for people. Her next project would not be about outshining Damien or proving herself to anyone. It would be about building something real. And as she sketched, she smiled. The woman who once fell into glass was gone. In her place stood a mother, a visionary, a survivor. Elena Carter Westwood was no longer broken. She was reborn. And to every woman watching, her message was clear. You are stronger than your pain. You are more than the man who betrays you. And when you rise not just for yourself, but for everyone who needs to see that broken glass can still reflect light. So that's it, my wonderful friends. The story has closed its last chapter. If you're still here with me right now, it means something in Elena's journey touched your heart in a way that words alone can't explain. And maybe, just maybe, it's because deep down we all know what it feels like to be broken and how powerful it is to rise again. The Stoics often said, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Elena's pain, her betrayal, her shattered glass floor, that was the obstacle. But it also became her path to strength, to freedom, to rebirth. And isn't that what life is about? Not escaping hardship, but transforming it into fuel. If this story moved you, please don't just keep it inside. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss another journey like this. Together, we rise from the shards, stronger than before.
Millionaire CEO called her barren and kicked her out. She returned pregnant and married to his rival. Maybe if my wife wasn't barren, we'd have something to celebrate besides quarterly projections. The champagne flute trembled in Sophia's hand. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, some pitying, others calculating. The silence was deafening. "Ethan." Her voice cut through the humiliation like steel. "We agreed to discuss this privately. Did we?" His gray eyes were ice-cold, unfamiliar. "Because I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when my investors ask about the Cross legacy." Margaret Cross's satisfied smile gleamed from across the room. This was the moment she'd orchestrated, the public execution of her daughter-in-law's dignity. Sophia set down her glass with deliberate care. "There's nothing more to discuss. Welcome back to Golden Family. I'm absolutely thrilled to see our incredible community growing stronger each day. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed and joined this journey with us. Now, let's get back to the story." The boardroom moment wasn't just humiliation. It was the culmination of months of carefully orchestrated cruelty. The fertility test results had arrived 3 weeks before, delivered with clinical precision that cut deeper than any blade. "We need to know what we're dealing with," Margaret Cross had declared, her manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany desk in her son's office. "Schedule Sophia for comprehensive testing. I want answers." Ethan had shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "Mother, perhaps we should discuss this with Sophia first." "Discuss what?" "Whether your wife is capable of producing an heir. This isn't a democracy, Ethan. This is business." Margaret's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years building the Cross empire alongside her late husband. "The investors are asking questions. Your board wants assurance about succession. We cannot afford uncertainty." When Dr. Harrison, the family physician who'd served the Cross family for decades, suggested including male factor analysis, Margaret had waved him off dismissively. "Focus on the wife. That's where these problems usually originate." The test results had been devastating. Low likelihood of conception. The words echoed through their penthouse, settling into the marble surfaces and designer furniture like a death sentence for their marriage. Sophia had carried that diagnosis like a scarlet letter, watching Ethan grow more distant with each passing day. "You're being dramatic," he'd said when she tried to discuss their options. "We'll figure something out. Maybe adoption, maybe surrogacy. There are solutions." But his tone suggested he was already calculating exit strategies, already measuring her worth against her ability to produce the next generation of Cross Industries leadership. Now, standing in that boardroom with 20 pairs of eyes dissecting her like a failed business proposal, Sophia understood that their marriage had never been about love. It had been a merger, and she was the underperforming asset about to be liquidated. The room remained frozen after her dignified response. Margaret's satisfaction was almost palpable, radiating from her corner seat like heat from a furnace. She'd orchestrated this moment perfectly, the public acknowledgement of Sophia's inadequacy, witnessed by the most powerful people in their social circle. "Well," Margaret said, breaking the silence with theatrical concern, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." But her timing was deliberate. The damage was done. Everyone in that room would carry this story to their country clubs, their charity galas, their board meetings. Ethan cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of his presentation. "As I was saying, Cross Industries is positioned for unprecedented growth in the next quarter." But Sophia wasn't listening anymore. She was watching her husband transform into someone she'd never really known, or perhaps someone she'd always known but refused to see. The charming man who'd swept her off her feet 4 years ago, who'd promised her forever beneath a canopy of roses, who'd whispered sweet declarations of love during their honeymoon in Tuscany, that man was revealing himself to be an illusion. The real Ethan Cross was standing before her now, calculating, cruel, and utterly without empathy for the woman who'd reorganized her entire life to fit into his. That night, she lay awake in their king-sized bed, listening to Ethan's measured breathing. He'd come home late, citing urgent business calls, but she could smell another woman's perfume clinging to his shirt. Even his infidelity felt like a business decision, hedging his bets, exploring other options while his current investment proved disappointing. "Ethan," she whispered into the darkness. "Oh? Do you remember our wedding day? What you promised me?" There was a long pause. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "People say a lot of things at weddings, Sophia. It doesn't mean they're binding contracts." The next morning brought the ultimate betrayal. Sophia woke to find her belongings already packed, boxes stacked in the foyer like tombstones marking the death of their marriage. Professional movers worked with military efficiency, erasing 4 years of her life from the penthouse she'd helped design. "Mrs. Cross." The head mover approached with a clipboard in hand. "We've been instructed to have everything removed by noon. Mr. Cross left these for you." He handed her an envelope containing divorce papers already filled out, along with a settlement offer that felt more like severance pay than alimony. No conversation. No explanation. No opportunity for discussion or reconciliation. Just the cold efficiency of a CEO cutting losses, eliminating dead weight from his portfolio. Her sister Maya arrived within the hour, taking one look at the scene and immediately wrapping Sophia in a fierce embrace. "He can't just throw you out like this," Maya fumed, her dark eyes blazing with protective fury. "You have rights. You could fight this. Make him pay for humiliating you." But Sophia felt hollowed out, emptied of the fight that had once defined her. She'd spent 4 years trying to be the wife Ethan wanted, the daughter-in-law Margaret demanded. She'd sacrificed her consulting business, her independence, her voice. She'd made herself smaller and smaller until she'd nearly disappeared entirely. "Let him have it all," she whispered, staring at her reflection in the hall mirror one last time. The woman looking back was a stranger, perfectly styled, expensively dressed, and completely without substance. "I need to remember who I was before I became this." As they loaded the last box into Maya's car, Sophia turned back to look at the penthouse one final time. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Seattle's skyline, but she realized she'd spent 4 years looking out at a world she was no longer part of. She'd been decorative, ornamental, a beautiful accessory to Ethan's success story. "You know what the crazy part is?" she said to Maya as they drove away. "I actually loved him. Not the man he pretended to be at the beginning, but even the real him. I loved him enough to believe I could be enough for him." Maya reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "That wasn't love, Sophia. That was you trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. Real love doesn't require you to disappear." The penthouse grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely, taking with it the last remnants of the woman Sophia had tried so desperately to become. But as they drove toward Maya's apartment and an uncertain future, something unexpected began to stir in her chest. It felt dangerous and unfamiliar and absolutely terrifying. It felt like hope. Maya's guest bedroom became Sophia's sanctuary and battlefield all at once. The room was small, cramped with mismatched furniture that bore no resemblance to the designer perfection she'd left behind. But for the first time in years, every object in that space belonged to her. The books she'd rescued from storage, the laptop she'd bought with her own money, the simple desk where she would rebuild her life one keystroke at a time. "You don't have to do this alone," Maya said, setting down a steaming cup of coffee beside Sophia's computer. It was week 3 of her new reality, and Sophia had barely left the desk except to sleep and eat. Yes, I do. Sophia's fingers paused over the keyboard where she'd been crafting her business plan. I need to prove to myself that I can. The Corporate Training Solutions website went live on a Tuesday morning in October. Sophia stared at the screen for 20 minutes after hitting publish, her heart hammering against her ribs. The logo was simple, the design clean but basic. Nothing like the glossy corporate presentations she'd grown accustomed to at Cross Industries. But it was hers. Her first client call came 2 days later. Ms. Morgan? The voice on the other end belonged to Janet Torres, HR director for a mid-sized accounting firm. I found your website through a Google search. We're having some serious communication issues between our departments, and I wondered if you might be available for a consultation. Sophia gripped the phone tighter. Absolutely. I'd love to discuss how I can help. The consultation went well, more than well. Janet was impressed with Sophia's insights, her practical solutions, her ability to identify the root causes of workplace dysfunction. But when it came time to discuss a contract, Janet's enthusiasm dimmed noticeably. I'll need to discuss this with our executive team, she said, her tone suddenly formal. We'll be in touch. The call never came. This pattern repeated itself over the next month. Initial interest, successful consultations, enthusiastic responses, followed by sudden radio silence. Sophia began to suspect what was happening, but it wasn't until her fourth potential client accidentally confirmed her fears that she understood the full scope of Margaret Cross's vendetta. Listen, whispered Rebecca Chin, the operations manager at a tech startup, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Margaret Cross called our CEO personally. She warned him that you were unstable after your divorce, said you might be unreliable, potentially damaging to work with. I'm sorry, I tried to advocate for you, but... The line went dead. Sophia sat in the coffee shop where she'd taken the call, staring at her silent phone. Margaret's reach extended far beyond what she'd imagined. The woman who'd controlled every aspect of Sophia's personal life was now systematically destroying her professional future. That which, Maya exploded when Sophia told her that evening. She can't just sabotage your entire career. She can, and she is. Sophia poured herself a glass of wine, the cheap kind from the grocery store, not the vintage bottles that had filled the Cross penthouse cellar. Somehow it tasted better. But you know what? She just made a critical mistake. What do you mean? Sophia's eyes held a fire that Maya hadn't seen since they were teenagers. She underestimated how desperate I am to survive. And desperate people fight harder than comfortable ones. The next morning, Sophia changed her strategy completely. Instead of targeting large corporations within Margaret's sphere of influence, she began reaching out to smaller businesses, startups, companies that operated outside Seattle's established power structure. She cold called, sent emails, showed up at networking events where Margaret Cross would never be caught dead. Her first real breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a women's entrepreneurship meetup held in the back room of a downtown bookstore. The gathering was small, scrappy, filled with women who were building businesses from nothing but determination and coffee. I'm Sarah Kim, said a woman in her 30s, extending her hand after Sophia's brief introduction. I run a digital marketing agency. We're growing fast, but our team communication is a disaster. Half of us work remotely, and the other half can't figure out how to collaborate effectively. I can help with that, Sophia said, and meant it. Sarah's company became Sophia's first official client. The contract was small, the fee modest, but the work was exactly what Sophia needed: challenging, meaningful, and completely disconnected from the Cross Industries network. You're brilliant at this, Sarah told her after their third workshop session. The way you helped us restructure our project management communication, it's like you could see problems we didn't even know we had. More importantly, Sarah began referring Sophia to other small business owners in her network. Word spread quietly through Seattle's entrepreneurial underground. There was a consultant who understood how to make teams work better, who listened before she prescribed solutions, who treated small businesses with the same respect that big firms reserved for Fortune 500 companies. You look different, Maya observed one evening as they prepared dinner together. It had been 3 months since the divorce, and Sophia was finally contributing to groceries again. Different how? You're not apologizing for existing anymore. The comment hit deeper than Maya probably intended. Sophia realized her sister was right. Somewhere in the process of rebuilding her business, she'd stopped the constant internal monologue of self-doubt that had defined her marriage. She no longer questioned every decision, second-guessed every opinion, or waited for permission to take up space in conversations. I think, Sophia said slowly, I'm remembering who I was before I became Mrs. Cross. Her client base grew steadily through the winter months. Small businesses, nonprofit organizations, community groups. People who needed her expertise but couldn't afford the premium consulting firms that Margaret's circle preferred. Sophia discovered she loved this work in a way she'd never loved anything at Cross Industries. These clients valued her insights, implemented her suggestions, thanked her for her time. They saw her as a problem solver, not a decorative appendage to someone else's success. The breakthrough moment came in February, when she landed a contract with a rapidly growing software company that needed comprehensive communication training before doubling their workforce. The project was ambitious, complex, and exactly the kind of challenge that would establish her reputation as more than just Ethan Cross's ex-wife. This could change everything, she told Maya over dinner, unable to contain her excitement. If I can pull this off, I'll have proven that I can handle major corporate projects independently. When did you start saying if? Maya asked with a grin. The Sophia I know doesn't do if, she does, when. That night, Sophia worked until dawn, crafting a proposal that showcased everything she'd learned about building genuine workplace collaboration. As the sun rose over Seattle, painting her small bedroom workspace in shades of gold and possibility, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt proud of herself. The phone call came 3 days later. Miss Morgan? This is Jennifer Walsh from Coal Dynamics. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your proposal. Coal Dynamics. Even Sophia, removed as she'd been from Seattle's business gossip, knew that name. Adrian Cole's company, the tech empire that had grown from nothing to challenge even established giants like Cross Industries. The one contract Ethan had never managed to steal, the one merger that had fallen through, the one competitor who seemed immune to the Cross Industries machine. I'd be happy to meet, Sophia said, her heart racing. When would be convenient? How about Monday morning? Mr. Cole specifically requested to meet with you personally. After hanging up, Sophia sat in her small bedroom office, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in that forest of glass and steel towers, Ethan Cross was probably sitting in his executive suite, believing he'd successfully erased her from his world. He had no idea that his greatest rival was about to give his ex-wife the opportunity of a lifetime. And Sophia intended to make absolutely certain that opportunity counted. The Coal Dynamics building stood like a testament to possibility in the heart of Seattle's tech district. Unlike the imposing glass fortress of Cross Industries with its cold, sterile lobby and security guards who treated visitors like potential threats, this place hummed with life. Sophia could hear laughter echoing from somewhere in the upper floors, the sound of actual human connection in a corporate space. Miss Morgan? The receptionist's smile was genuine, not the practiced politeness Sophia remembered from her Cross Industries days. Mr. Cole is ready for you. Take the elevator to the 15th floor. His assistant Emma will meet you there. As the elevator climbed, Sophia caught glimpses of each floor through the glass panels. Open workspaces where people collaborated over whiteboards, a game room where employees took actual breaks, meeting rooms with walls covered in colorful sticky notes and innovative brainstorming sessions. This wasn't just a different company, it was a different philosophy. Emma greeted her with warmth that felt refreshingly authentic. Mr. Cole is excited to meet you. Fair warning, he's probably going to grill you about your communication theories. He's genuinely passionate about this stuff. They walked down a hallway lined with employee achievement photos, startup milestone celebrations, and candid shots of team-building activities. It was everything Cross Industries wasn't: human, warm, real. Adrian Cole's office door was open, and Sophia could see him before he noticed her arrival. He was standing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. The space reflected the same energy as the rest of the building: books scattered across surfaces, a whiteboard covered in equations and flow charts, windows that actually opened to let in fresh air. No, Mike, I don't care what the quarterly projections look like on paper, he was saying into the phone. If our employee satisfaction scores drop, we've failed as leaders. Period. He looked up as Emma knocked, and his expression shifted immediately. I need to go. We'll continue this later. Adrian Cole was nothing like his media photos suggested. Shorter than Ethan, with laugh lines around intelligent brown eyes and a handshake that lingered just long enough to feel personal without crossing professional boundaries. Where Ethan commanded rooms through intimidation and inherited authority, Adrian's presence felt earned, confident without being arrogant, powerful without being cruel. Miss Cross, he said, then immediately caught himself. I'm sorry, Ms. Morgan. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me. It's Morgan now, Sophia confirmed, appreciating that he'd corrected himself. And I was avoiding you. His eyebrows rose with obvious amusement. Refreshingly honest. I like that. Coffee? I make it myself. Fair warning, it's either excellent or terrible depending on your tolerance for experimentation. I'll risk it. As he prepared their coffee, Sophia studied his office more carefully. Unlike Ethan's sterile showcase of expensive art and status symbols, this space told stories. A guitar leaned against one wall, sheet music scattered on a side table. Bookshelves held everything from advanced programming texts to poetry collections. A photo showed Adrian with his team at what looked like a company retreat, everyone covered in paint from some kind of team-building exercise. So, he said, handing her a mug that read World's Okayasio, tell me why you were avoiding coal dynamics. Sophia took a sip of the coffee, it was excellent, and considered her answer. Because I assumed you knew who I was married to, and I figured this was either a publicity stunt or a way to get information about Cross Industries. Fair assumption. Adrian settled into the chair across from her rather than behind his desk, eliminating the power dynamic that Ethan wielded like a weapon. For the record, I've known about your marriage to Ethan Cross since day one. His mother's smear campaign wasn't exactly subtle. The directness should have been jarring, but instead Sophia felt relieved. And you still wanted to meet with me? Especially because I wanted to meet with you. Adrian's expression grew serious. Here's the thing about Margaret Cross trying to destroy someone's reputation. It tells me more about her than it does about you. And frankly, anyone Ethan Cross discarded is probably worth a closer look. They spent the next hour discussing Coal Dynamics expansion plans. Adrian wanted to implement company-wide communication training before doubling their workforce. Ambitious, expensive, and exactly the kind of project that could establish Sophia as a major player in Seattle's consulting landscape. Our growth has been organic, sometimes chaotic, he explained, pulling up organizational charts on his laptop. We've got brilliant people who struggle to collaborate effectively across departments. Remote teams that feel disconnected from the main office. Managers who are technical geniuses but communication disasters. Sophia found herself leaning forward, engaged in a way she hadn't felt during any Cross Industries meeting. What's your timeline? Aggressive. We're announcing the expansion in 6 months, which means we need these systems in place and running smoothly before then. Adrian studied her face. I know it's a massive undertaking. Most consulting firms have told me it's impossible. Most consulting firms don't understand that communication isn't just about processes, it's about culture, Sophia replied. You can't train people to collaborate effectively if the environment doesn't support genuine connection. Exactly. Adrian's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm Sophia remembered feeling about her work before Ethan had slowly drained it away. That's why I wanted to meet with you specifically. Your proposal was the only one that addressed the cultural component. As they dove deeper into the project details, Sophia felt her professional confidence resurging. She wasn't performing or trying to impress. She was problem-solving, strategizing, doing the work she genuinely loved. Adrian listened to her ideas without interrupting, asked thoughtful questions that showed he understood the complexity of what she was proposing, and treated her insights as valuable rather than decorative. There's something else you should know, Adrian said as their meeting stretched into the second hour. Margaret Cross has been calling my competitors, warning them about you. She's told them you're unstable, after the divorce, potentially unreliable. Sophia's coffee grew cold in her hands. How do you know that? Because she called me too. Adrian's smile held a sharp edge. She seemed to think I'd be particularly receptive to warnings about Ethan Cross's ex-wife. What she didn't understand is that anyone Margaret Cross warns me away from automatically becomes more interesting. And that doesn't concern you? The potential complications of hiring someone with so much baggage? Sophia. The way he said her name made her look up sharply. I've been watching Ethan Cross operate for 8 years. I've seen how he treats employees, vendors, competitors, anyone he perceives as beneath him. The fact that he threw away someone as brilliant as you tells me everything I need to know about his judgment. The compliment caught her off guard, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. When was the last time someone had called her brilliant? When had anyone besides Maya treated her intelligence as an asset rather than a threat? Why do you do that? She asked suddenly. Do what? Talk about me like I'm... She struggled to find the words. Like I'm worth something. Adrian's expression softened. Because you are. And the fact that you have to ask that question tells me exactly what kind of marriage you escaped. The vulnerability of the moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Sophia found herself studying Adrian's face, the genuine warmth in his eyes, the way he listened like her words actually mattered, the complete absence of the calculating coldness she'd grown accustomed to with Ethan. "So," Adrian said finally, breaking the spell, "are you interested in taking on an impossible project with a CEO who makes questionable coffee and has probably bitten off more than he can chew?" "That depends," Sophia replied, surprised by her own boldness. "Are you interested in working with a consultant who comes with more drama than a soap opera and a tendency to overthink everything?" "Lady Drama is my middle name. And overthinking is just thorough preparation in disguise." They shook hands on the deal and Sophia felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just a professional opportunity, it was a chance to prove that Margaret Cross's sabotage had only made her stronger, that Ethan's cruelty had forged her into someone more resilient than either of them imagined. Walking out of Cold Dynamics that afternoon, Sophia pulled out her phone and called Maya. "How did it go?" her sister asked immediately. "I got the contract." "That's amazing. What's he like?" Sophia paused on the sidewalk, looking back up at the building where Adrian Cole was probably already implementing her suggestions, treating her ideas with the respect they deserved. "He's dangerous," she said finally. "Dangerous how?" Sophia smiled, feeling something flutter in her chest that she'd thought Ethan had killed forever. "He makes me remember what it feels like to be seen." That night, Sophia worked on the Cold Dynamics proposal until dawn, crafting a comprehensive plan that would revolutionize how the company approached internal communication. But more than that, she was crafting her own revolution, one that would prove to everyone, including herself, that her value had never been dependent on Ethan Cross's approval. She just didn't know yet that the man who'd hired her was about to become the man who'd heal her heart completely. The first month working with Cold Dynamics felt like emerging from a long, suffocating tunnel into sunlight. Sophia found herself looking forward to Monday mornings for the first time in years, eager to dive into the complex challenge of restructuring communication across a rapidly growing company. "Your preliminary assessment is brilliant," Adrian said during their third weekly check-in, spreading her charts across his conference table. "The way you've identified the bottlenecks between our remote and in-office teams, I've been struggling with this for months." Sophia felt warmth spread through her chest at the genuine appreciation in his voice. The solution isn't just about better video conferencing or project management software. It's about creating connection points where people can build actual relationships. "Show me." She moved closer to point out specific areas on the organizational chart, and caught the subtle scent of his cologne. Something clean and understated, nothing like Ethan's aggressive designer fragrances that announced his presence before he entered a room. "See here?" She traced the workflow patterns with her finger. "Your design team and your development team are technically collaborating, but they're operating in separate universes. No shared language, no mutual understanding of constraints and possibilities." Adrian studied the charts, occasionally asking questions that showed he truly understood the complexity of what she was proposing. This was professional respect in its purest form, two minds working together toward a common goal, each bringing their expertise without ego or competition. "What do you recommend?" "Cross-functional workshops. But not the usual corporate team-building nonsense," Sophia said, warming to her subject. "Real working sessions where they solve actual problems together, learn each other's languages, understand how their decisions impact the other department." "That's actually revolutionary." The way he looked at her when he said it made her breath catch. There was admiration there, yes, but something deeper too. Something that made her remember she was more than just a problem solver or a consultant or an ex-wife carrying baggage. She was a woman. And for the first time in years she felt like one. Their professional meetings began extending naturally into longer conversations. Coffee turned into lunch discussions about implementation strategies. Lunch stretched into early dinner as they refined training modules. Neither of them acknowledged the shift explicitly, but both felt it, the gradual blurring of professional boundaries into something more personal. "My ex-wife used to say I was married to the business," Adrian told her one evening as they reviewed training materials in his office. The building had emptied hours ago, but neither seemed eager to leave. She wasn't wrong. "After the divorce, I threw myself even deeper into work. Built this place into something that could compete with anyone, including your ex-husband." "How long were you married?" Sophia asked, surprised by her own curiosity about his personal life. "4 years. Same as you." Adrian's smile was rueful. "Different problems though. Sarah wanted me to be someone I wasn't, more social, more interested in the Seattle society scene, more willing to use cold dynamics as a networking tool rather than an actual business. And you weren't interested in that life? I'd rather build something meaningful than schmooze at charity galas where people write checks for tax deductions. He paused, studying her face. What about you? What did Ethan want you to be? The question hit deeper than expected. Smaller, Sophia said quietly. He wanted me to take up less space, have fewer opinions, need less attention. I spent 4 years trying to compress myself into whatever shape would make him comfortable. That must have been exhausting. It was. But the worst part was losing track of who I actually was underneath all that performance. Adrian was quiet for a moment, then said, "For what it's worth, I think the real you is pretty extraordinary." The compliment hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Sophia felt her pulse quicken, recognizing the flutter of attraction she'd thought Ethan had destroyed forever. "Adrian?" "I know," he said quickly. "I know you're not ready for this, whatever this is. I just wanted you to know that someone sees you, the real you, and thinks you're worth seeing." That night, driving home through the rain-soaked Seattle streets, Sophia called her therapist. "I want to add another session this week," she told Dr. Martinez. "I think I'm ready to talk about what comes after healing." Dr. Martinez's office had become another sanctuary over the past few months, a place where Sophia could untangle the psychological knots that 4 years with Ethan had tied in her mind. The sessions weren't easy, but they were necessary. "You mentioned last week that you're starting to feel attraction again," Dr. Martinez said during their Thursday appointment. "How does that feel?" "Terrifying," Sophia admitted. "What if I'm just repeating patterns? What if I'm attracted to Adrian because he's Ethan's rival, not because of who he actually is?" "What do you think?" Sophia considered the question seriously. "When I was with Ethan, I was always performing. Always trying to be the version of myself that would make him happy. With Adrian, I don't feel like I need to perform. I feel like I can just be myself." "And how does that feel?" "Like coming home to myself." The breakthrough came during a particularly intense training session with Cold Dynamics management team. Sophia was facilitating a communication exercise when one of the department heads, a man named Robert who reminded her uncomfortably of Ethan, began undermining her authority. "I'm not sure someone who couldn't make her own marriage work is qualified to teach us about collaboration," he said with a cold smile. The room went silent. Sophia felt the familiar flood of shame and self-doubt, the automatic impulse to apologize and shrink away. But then she caught Adrian's eye across the room. He wasn't rushing to her defense or trying to control the situation. He was simply waiting, trusting her to handle it herself. And she did. "You're right, Robert," she said calmly. "My marriage failed spectacularly. But that failure taught me something valuable about what collaboration actually requires. Respect, genuine listening, and the willingness to prioritize the relationship over being right. From what I've observed today, those are skills you might benefit from developing." The man's face flushed red, but he didn't respond. The rest of the team looked impressed, and Sophia felt something powerful settle into her bones. She wasn't the woman who'd been broken in that cross-industries boardroom. She was someone stronger, someone who could stand up for herself without apology or explanation. After the session, Adrian found her in the break room. "That was masterful," he said, pouring himself coffee from the machine. "I almost lost it for a second there. But you didn't. You held your ground and turned his attack into a teaching moment." Adrian's eyes held warmth and something that looked like pride. "That's the mark of someone who's done the hard work of knowing their own worth." "Is that your professional opinion, Dr. Cole?" "That's my personal observation, Ms. Morgan." The way he said her name, like it mattered, like she mattered, made her heart skip. She was beginning to understand that what she felt for Adrian wasn't rebound attraction or misplaced gratitude. It was the recognition of someone who saw her clearly and chose to value what he saw. "Adrian," she said carefully, "would you like to have dinner sometime? Not a working dinner. Just dinner." His smile could have powered the entire building. "I thought you'd never ask." As they stood in that ordinary break room, surrounded by the mundane details of office life, Sophia felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't the desperate, grasping feeling she'd mistaken for love with Ethan. This was steadier, warmer, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. It felt like the beginning of something real. And for the first time since her divorce, Sophia allowed herself to hope that she deserved something real. The workplace health screening was routine, a benefit of Sophia's new corporate insurance through her consulting practice. She almost skipped it, buried as she was in the final preparations for Cold Dynamics' comprehensive training rollout. but Maya had been relentless. "When's the last time you saw a doctor who wasn't chosen by Margaret Cross?" her sister had demanded over breakfast. The question hit harder than intended. During her marriage, even Sophia's healthcare had been managed by the Cross family physician, Dr. Harrison, a man who'd treated Margaret for 30 years and seemed to view Sophia as an extension of her mother-in-law rather than an individual patient. Dr. Sarah Chen's office felt like stepping into a different universe. Younger, more modern, with walls covered in medical degrees from prestigious universities and patient testimonials that spoke of thoroughness and genuine care. Dr. Chen herself was refreshingly direct, treating Sophia like an intelligent adult rather than a delicate flower who couldn't handle medical realities. "I'm reviewing your medical history," Dr. Chen said, frowning at her computer screen during their initial consultation. "I see you had fertility testing done last year. These results seem incomplete." Sophia's heart clenched, the familiar shame washing over her like a tide. "What do you mean?" "Well, for starters, there's no male factor analysis. That's standard protocol when couples are experiencing difficulty conceiving. About 40% of fertility issues are male-related, so any comprehensive evaluation should include both partners." The room seemed to tilt. "My husband wasn't tested." "Never?" Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose with obvious surprise. "That's highly unusual. Modern fertility medicine always evaluates both partners simultaneously. And looking at these hormone levels?" She scrolled through the digital file. "I'd like to run them again. Sometimes severe stress can temporarily skew results, and according to your intake form, you were going through significant marital difficulties at the time." Sophia sat in stunned silence as Dr. Chen explained the testing protocol she should have received. Comprehensive hormone panels, ovarian reserve testing, structural evaluations, none of which had been performed during her original assessment. Dr. Harrison had run a basic panel during what was arguably the most stressful period of her life and declared her the source of their fertility problems. "I don't understand," Sophia whispered. Dr. Harrison said the results were conclusive. "Dr. Harrison should have known better," Dr. Chen said with barely concealed disapproval. "Fertility is always a couple's issue, never just a woman's burden to carry. Without testing both partners, any diagnosis is essentially meaningless." The blood work appointment was scheduled for the following week. Sophia left Dr. Chen's office feeling like she was walking through a dream, or perhaps waking up from a nightmare she'd been living for months. She drove aimlessly through Seattle's afternoon traffic, her mind spinning with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. What if the problem had never been hers at all? "You're quiet tonight," Adrian observed during their dinner date, their third official non-working meal together. They'd chosen a small Italian restaurant in Capitol Hill, far from the upscale establishments where they might encounter Seattle's business elite. "Just processing something," Sophia said, twirling pasta around her fork without really eating. "I had a medical appointment today. My new doctor wants to rerun some tests." "Everything okay?" She looked up to find genuine concern in his eyes, not the calculating assessment she'd grown accustomed to with Ethan, but real worry for her well-being. The difference still caught her off guard sometimes. "I think so. It's just, do you ever wonder how much of what you believed about yourself was actually true?" Adrian set down his wine glass, giving her his full attention. "What do you mean?" "The fertility test that convinced Ethan I was the problem, they were apparently incomplete. My new doctor seems to think the whole diagnosis was based on inadequate information." "Jesus, Sophia." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You mean to tell me that bastard blamed you for something without even getting proper medical evaluation?" "It's starting to look that way." The anger in Adrian's eyes was fierce and protective, nothing like Ethan's cold disappointment when faced with inconvenient truths. "I'm sorry. I know this must be confusing and painful. I keep thinking about all the shame I carried. All the times I apologized for failing him, for not being able to give him what he wanted. What if none of it was necessary?" Adrian reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Even if the medical diagnosis was wrong, his treatment of you was inexcusable. No matter what challenges you were facing, you deserved compassion and support, not public humiliation." The test results came back exactly 1 week later. Dr. Chen called personally to discuss them, her voice warm with what sounded like vindication. "I have good news, Sophia. Your hormone levels are completely normal. Your ovarian reserve is excellent for your age. The structural evaluation shows no abnormalities. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your reproductive system." Sophia gripped the phone tighter, barely breathing. "But the other tests?" "The other tests were performed during a period of extreme stress, which can temporarily suppress fertility hormones. Additionally, they were incomplete and inadequately interpreted. You've been carrying a false diagnosis for months. After hanging up, Sophia sat in her car in the medical building parking lot for an hour, crying angry tears. Not because she wanted Ethan back. That chapter of her life was permanently closed. But because she'd carried the weight of their failure alone, had absorbed his cruelty and Margaret's disappointment, had restructured her entire sense of self around a lie. She thought about calling him, demanding he get tested, forcing him to confront the possibility that he'd been wrong. The fantasy of his shock and remorse was satisfying for about 30 seconds before she realized the pointlessness of it. Ethan had shown her exactly who he was in that boardroom. The medical truth wouldn't change the emotional reality of what he'd done. Instead, she drove straight to Adrian's office. "I brought Chinese food," she announced, holding up takeout bags as his assistant waved her through. "And I have something important to tell you." They spread the containers across his conference table, sharing lo mein and spring rolls while she explained Dr. Chen's findings. Adrian listened without interruption, his expression darkening as she described the original doctor's dismissive attitude, Margaret's orchestration of the incomplete testing, Ethan's reaction to the false diagnosis. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rough with suppressed anger. "Not just about the medical mistake but about what you were led to believe about yourself. About how they made you carry that burden alone. The strangest part is, I'm not even angry about the medical error anymore. I'm angry about the assumptions. That it had to be my fault. That I didn't deserve a complete evaluation. That my feelings didn't matter as much as their need for someone to blame." Adrian pushed aside his container and moved closer to her on the small couch in his office seating area. "For what it's worth, I think Ethan Cross is an idiot in more ways than I can count. And anyone who couldn't see your worth was never worthy of you in the first place." When he kissed her that night, soft and tentative in the quiet office, it tasted like truth, like possibility, like everything she'd thought she'd lost forever. And for the first time since her marriage had imploded, Sophia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be loved by someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. The revelation had set her free from more than just a false medical diagnosis. It had freed her from the last chains of shame that Ethan Cross had wrapped around her heart. That first kiss in Adrian's office became the foundation for something Sophia had never experienced before. A relationship built on truth rather than performance. There were no games, no calculations, no careful monitoring of moods and reactions. Just two people who'd been broken by their previous marriages choosing to build something entirely different together. "I want to take this slow," Sophia told him the next evening as they walked through Pike Place Market, weaving between tourists and locals in the golden hour before sunset. "Not because I don't want this, but because I want to do it right." "Define slow," Adrian said with a smile, adjusting his pace to match her leisurely stroll. "I want to know you. Really know you. Your fears, your dreams, the things that make you laugh at 2 in the morning. I want to understand what makes you who you are when no one's watching." "That's not slow, Sophia. That's thorough. There's a difference." They spent the following months doing exactly that, learning each other with the patience of people who'd made the mistake of rushing before. Weekend mornings at farmers' markets, where Adrian revealed his surprisingly extensive knowledge of organic farming techniques. Evening cooking sessions in Sophia's small apartment, where she discovered he could make pasta from scratch but couldn't scramble eggs without burning them. "Tell me about your family," she said one night as they sat on her tiny balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and watching Seattle's skyline sparkle in the darkness. "Not much to tell. Parents divorced when I was 12. Dad was a workaholic who built a moderately successful construction company and forgot he had a son. Mom remarried and moved to Portland when I was 16. Adrian's voice was matter-of-fact, but Sophia caught the underlying hurt. "I learned early that if I wanted something built, whether it was a business or a relationship, I had to do it myself." "Is that why you work so hard? To prove something to him?" "Maybe initially. But now." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "Now I work hard because I want to build something that lasts. Something that matters." The way he said it made her understand that he wasn't just talking about cold dynamics. Their relationship unfolded in stolen moments between her consulting projects and his executive responsibilities. Quiet dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants where they wouldn't be seen by Seattle's gossip mill. Long walks through neighborhoods where Adrian would point out architectural details with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved his city. Sunday mornings spent reading different sections of the newspaper while their feet touched under the covers of Sophia's bed. "You know what I love about us?" Sophia said one morning, looking up from the arts section to find Adrian focused intently on a technology article. What's that? We can just exist together. I don't feel like I need to entertain you or be on all the time. Adrian set down his paper and pulled her closer. That's because you don't. I fell in love with who you actually are, not who you think you should be. The word love hung between them like a bridge they'd both been approaching but hadn't quite crossed yet. Sophia felt her heart skip, not with anxiety but with recognition. I love you too, she said simply. The real you. The one who makes terrible coffee and argues with the newspaper and stays late at the office because you genuinely care about your employees. It was Margaret Cross who forced their relationship into the public eye, though certainly not intentionally. Sophia was leaving Adrian's building after an evening meeting when she spotted the familiar silver Mercedes in the parking lot. Margaret herself emerged from the lobby, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. You manipulative little opportunist, Margaret hissed, her usual polished composure cracking completely. Seducing my son's biggest competitor? How pathetically predictable. Mrs. Cross. Sophia's voice was steady, though her pulse quickened. Adrian and I are simply. Don't you dare play innocent with me. I know exactly what you're doing and it won't work. I'll make sure every respectable person in this city knows what kind of woman you really are. And what kind of woman is that? The kind who destroys marriages and then runs straight to her ex-husband's rival for revenge. Adrian's voice cut through the parking lot like a blade. That's enough. He'd emerged from the building behind Margaret, his expression thunderous. Sophia had never seen him angry before, not truly angry, and the controlled fury radiating from him was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Mr. Cole, Margaret said, attempting to regain her composure. I was simply trying to warn you about the kind of woman you're involving yourself with. The kind of woman I'm involving myself with, Adrian said, moving to stand beside Sophia, is intelligent, compassionate, and strong enough to rebuild her life after your family tried to destroy it. If that threatens you, Mrs. Cross, perhaps you should examine your own motivations. Margaret's face flushed red. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Actually, I do. I'm getting myself into a relationship with a woman who deserves far better than she got from your son. And if you continue to harass her, you'll discover exactly how seriously I take threats against people I care about. After Margaret's Mercedes disappeared into the Seattle traffic, Adrian turned to Sophia with concern etched across his features. Are you okay? I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Sophia felt something settle into place in her chest, a sense of being protected and valued that she'd never experienced with Ethan. Thank you for standing up for me. You don't need to thank me for that. We're a team now. The proposal came 6 months later, during a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands. Nothing elaborate or public. Just Adrian and Sophia on a quiet beach at sunset, talking about their future with the kind of easy intimacy that had defined their entire relationship. I want to build a life with you, he said, producing a simple, elegant ring from his jacket pocket. Not because I need you to complete me or because you fit into some predetermined plan, but because you make me want to be the best version of myself, and I hope I do the same for you. Yes, Sophia said without hesitation. Yes to all of it. The wedding planning process revealed just how different this relationship was from her first marriage. Where Ethan and Margaret had orchestrated every detail of her previous wedding like a corporate merger announcement, Adrian listened to what Sophia actually wanted and helped make it happen. Small ceremony, she told him. Family and close friends only. Somewhere meaningful to us, not designed to impress people we don't really like. The botanical gardens where we had our third date? Perfect. They wrote their own vows, choosing words that reflected their actual relationship rather than generic promises about roles and expectations. Maya cried during the ceremony, happy tears for a sister who'd finally found someone who cherished rather than diminished her. You look different than you did at your first wedding, Maya observed during the reception, a casual gathering in the garden's reception hall. Different how? Like yourself. Like the person you were always meant to be. That night, in their suite at a small bed and breakfast on Vashon Island, Sophia lay in Adrian's arms and felt the profound peace of being exactly where she belonged. What are you thinking about? He asked, tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. How patient you were with me. How you never pushed or demanded or tried to fix me. You didn't need fixing. You needed space to heal and remember who you were. And now we build whatever comes next. Together. Outside their window, the Puget Sound stretched toward infinity, reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. Inside their room, Two people who'd learned the difference between love and possession settled into their first night as partners in the truest sense of the word. Neither of them knew yet that their greatest joy, and Sophia's ultimate vindication, was already beginning to grow within her. The first year of marriage was a revelation in ordinary magic. Adrian treated Sophia like an equal partner in everything. Business decisions, household choices, even which restaurant to try on Friday nights. It was mundane and revolutionary at the same time, this life built on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. I used to think love meant sacrificing yourself for someone else's vision, Sophia told Dr. Martinez during one of their monthly sessions. She'd continued therapy even after the wedding, recognizing that healing was an ongoing process rather than a destination. And now I think it means building something together that makes you both more than you were alone. Cold dynamics continued to flourish, and with it, Sophia's consulting practice. She was turning down clients now, a luxury she'd never imagined during those desperate early months after her divorce. Her reputation was built on results rather than connections, and that felt like vindication of the most satisfying kind. It was during one of these peaceful periods, a rare week without travel, with deadlines met and projects humming along smoothly, that Sophia's body began to whisper secrets she wasn't ready to hear. At first, she attributed the bone-deep fatigue to her demanding schedule. The wave of nausea that hit her during a client presentation seemed like stress. It wasn't until she realized she'd missed her second period that the impossible possibility began to take shape in her mind. The pregnancy test sat on their bathroom counter for 20 minutes while Sophia stared at it, afraid to look. She'd bought it during lunch, hidden it in her purse like contraband, waiting until Adrian left for an evening board meeting before taking it. When she finally worked up the courage to check the results, the two pink lines seemed to glow against the white plastic. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The word felt foreign in her mouth, loaded with 4 years of shame and disappointment and medical lies. But underneath the disbelief, something else was stirring, a joy so fierce and unexpected it took her breath away. Adrian found her there an hour later, still holding the test like a talisman. Sophia? I saw your car in the driveway but you didn't answer when I... He stopped when he saw her face, taking in her tear-streaked cheeks and the plastic stick in her trembling hands. What's wrong? She held up the test wordlessly. His reaction wasn't what she'd expected. Instead of shock or joy or even concern, Adrian's face crumpled with something that looked almost like grief. He sank to his knees beside her chair, his hands covering his face. I'm so sorry, he whispered. This is my fault. I should have been more careful. Your fault? Sophia stared at him, genuinely confused. Adrian, what are you talking about? I know how much the fertility issue hurt you. I know you've made peace with not having children. You've built this beautiful life, found success and happiness, and now, he gestured helplessly at the test. I've screwed everything up. For a moment she couldn't speak. This wonderful, careful, considerate man was apologizing for giving her something she'd wanted so desperately that she'd convinced herself she didn't want it at all. Adrian. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I'm not upset because I'm pregnant. I'm upset because I'm happy about it and I don't know if I'm allowed to be. They held each other on the bathroom floor, crying for different reasons that somehow added up to the same overwhelming relief. 4 years of medical lies, public humiliation, and internalized shame began to dissolve in the face of this simple, miraculous truth. She was carrying their child. Their healthy, wanted, celebrated child. The pregnancy progressed like a dream, smooth and uncomplicated, as if Sophia's body was making up for lost time. Morning sickness faded by the second trimester. Her energy returned stronger than before. She glowed, literally glowed according to Maya, who appointed herself official photographer of the transformation. You look like yourself again, Adrian said one evening, his hand resting on her growing belly as they lay in bed. The self you were meant to be all along. Sophia had been thinking the same thing. Somewhere in the process of healing from her marriage, building a business, falling in love again, and now growing a child, she'd found the woman she'd been before Ethan and Margaret Cross had tried to reshape her into someone smaller and more manageable. She was fiercer now. More protective of her own worth. Less willing to apologize for taking up space in the world. The pregnancy had awakened something primal and powerful in her. Not just the biological drive to protect her unborn child, but the psychological drive to protect the woman she'd fought so hard to become. Which made the inevitable encounter with Ethan both easier and harder than she'd expected. She was leaving her obstetrician's office on a crisp March afternoon, hand resting unconsciously on her 6-month belly, when she saw him across the medical building parking lot. Ethan looked older, grayer around the temples despite being only 35. The successful businessman's uniform, tailored suit, expensive watch, perfect posture, couldn't quite hide the fact that he looked tired. Although, for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan was walking toward her, his expression shifting from shock to something harder to read. Sophia. His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the slight tremor underneath. You look, well. Thank you. She didn't move toward her car, but she didn't step closer either. How are you, Ethan? His eyes dropped to her belly, and she saw the exact moment understanding hit him. His face went through a series of micro-expressions. Confusion, realization, something that might have been pain or anger or both. Congratulations, he said finally. The word sounded like it physically hurt him to say. Thank you. They stood there for a moment, two people who'd once shared a life now connected only by the weight of shared history and mutual damage. Sophia felt nothing for him, no anger, no sadness, no residual affection. Just a kind of distant curiosity like observing an exhibit in a museum. I heard you married Cole, Ethan said, and there was definitely an edge to his voice now. Interesting choice. Adrian is a good man, Sophia replied simply. Is he? Ethan's composure cracked slightly. Or did you just want to prove a point? The accusation hung between them, ugly and predictable. This was the Ethan she remembered, the one who couldn't imagine that anyone's choices weren't somehow about him. You think I married Adrian to hurt you? Sophia asked, genuinely curious rather than defensive. You think I got pregnant to prove you wrong? Didn't you? For a moment, she was tempted to tell him about Dr. Chen's findings, about the incomplete fertility testing, about the male factor analysis that had never been performed. She wanted to watch his face when he realized that his cruel certainty had been built on medical negligence and his mother's manipulations. But looking at him now, this bitter, diminished version of the man she'd once loved, she realized that the truth wouldn't heal him any more than his lies had healed her. You were right about one thing, she said quietly. I couldn't have had a child with you. But not because my body couldn't, because my heart couldn't. Ethan's face went very still. What's that supposed to mean? It means that creating life requires more than just biology. It requires love that makes space for growth rather than demanding conformity. It requires partnership that builds up rather than tears down. It requires seeing your partner as a whole person rather than a function in your business plan. She started walking toward her car, then paused. You never loved me, Ethan. You loved the idea of me, the perfectly crafted wife who would fit seamlessly into your predetermined life. When I couldn't be that fantasy, you discarded me. But Adrian. She smiled, one hand moving protectively to her belly. Adrian loves the real me. All of me. Even the parts that don't fit into neat categories or serve obvious purposes. So this is your revenge? Marry my biggest competitor and have his baby? The question revealed everything about how Ethan saw the world, as a series of transactions and power plays where every choice was calculated for maximum strategic advantage. This isn't revenge, Ethan. This is life. Real life, built on real love with someone who sees me as more than a means to an end. Sophia opened her car door, then looked back at him one final time. I hope you find what you're looking for. But I hope you learn to look for it in the right places. Driving home through Seattle's familiar streets, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced since the day she'd walked out of that boardroom. Complete and utter freedom. Not just from Ethan's judgment or Margaret's manipulation, but from the last vestiges of shame and self-doubt they'd planted in her heart. That night, she told Adrian about the encounter over dinner. How do you feel? He asked, reaching across their small dining table to take her hand. Free, she said, surprised by the honesty of it. For the first time since I married him, I feel completely free. Good, Adrian said, bringing her hand to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her palm. Because you deserve to feel free. You deserve to feel loved. And you deserve to believe that this, he gestured to her belly, to their home, to the life they'd built together, is exactly what you were meant to have. As their daughter kicked gently against Sophia's ribs, as if in agreement, Sophia finally understood what Maya had been trying to tell her all along. Love wasn't about making yourself smaller. It was about finding someone who celebrated how magnificent you could become. 3 months later, Elena Rose Cole arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, as if she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to make her grand entrance into the world. She came quickly, decisively, with none of the complications that Sophia's previous doctors had predicted would plague any pregnancy she might achieve. She's perfect, Dr. Chen said, placing the squirming, alert baby on Sophia's chest. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and clearly her mother's determination. Elena's eyes opened immediately, dark like Adrian's but with an unmistakable spark of curiosity that was purely her own. She looked around the delivery room with the focused attention of someone who'd been eagerly waiting to see what all the fuss was about. "Hello, beautiful girl," Sophia whispered, tears streaming down her face as she touched her daughter's tiny hand. "We've been waiting for you." Adrian, who'd been a steady presence throughout the entire labor, leaned over to kiss both his wife and daughter. "She's incredible. Look at her, she already knows exactly who she is." Maya arrived within the hour, bearing flowers and barely contained excitement. "She's gorgeous," she whispered, carefully holding her niece for the first time. "She looks like she belongs exactly where she is." It was true. Elena fit perfectly into their arms, their family, their life, as if she'd been designed specifically for this moment, these parents, this love story that had required heartbreak and healing to reach its proper conclusion. "I can't believe she's really here," Sophia said later that evening, when the visitors had gone home and Elena was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet beside the hospital bed. "I can," Adrian replied, curling up beside his wife in the narrow hospital bed. "She's exactly what happens when two people love each other the way we do. When they create space for miracles instead of trying to control every outcome." Outside their window, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, the same city where Sophia had once felt so small and powerless. Now it looked full of possibility, full of new beginnings and second chances and the kind of justice that arrives not through revenge but through the simple act of building something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. "Thank you," Adrian whispered against Sophia's hair. "For what?" "For teaching me the difference between taking up space and making room for each other. For showing me what it means to love someone without trying to change them. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing I was worth loving when I'd forgotten how to believe it." As Elena stirred in her sleep, making the tiny sounds that newborns make when they're dreaming of the world they've just entered, Sophia felt the last piece of her healing fall into place. This wasn't just about having a baby or proving Ethan wrong. This was about completing the journey back to herself, the woman who'd been buried under years of criticism and control, now finally free to be exactly who she was meant to be. Meanwhile, across town in the penthouse that had once been their shared prison, Ethan Cross sat alone in his study, staring at an unopened envelope on his mahogany desk. The return address read Seattle Fertility Associates. The comprehensive male factor analysis his lawyer had finally convinced him to take after the divorce proceedings raised uncomfortable questions about the incomplete testing that had destroyed his marriage. The envelope had been sitting there for 3 days. 3 days of avoiding the truth he'd been too proud and too certain to seek when it might have mattered. 3 days of wondering if the woman he'd publicly humiliated had been innocent of the failure he'd blamed her for. 3 days of calculating the cost of his cruelty in terms he was only beginning to understand. Margaret had called twice, wanting to discuss the situation with Sophia's pregnancy and what it might mean for the family's reputation. But Ethan hadn't taken her calls. For the first time in his adult life, his mother's opinions felt irrelevant, her manipulations transparent and ultimately destructive. He poured himself another scotch and continued staring at the envelope, knowing that whatever it contained would arrive far too late to matter. Some truths he was learning came with expiration dates. Some chances, once destroyed, couldn't be reconstructed with apologies or money or even genuine remorse. But some truths arrived exactly when they were supposed to, not to heal old wounds but to prevent new ones. Not to change the past but to illuminate the path forward. Back in the hospital room, as Elena Rose Cole settled into her first night of life surrounded by parents who would love her unconditionally, who would celebrate her existence as the miracle it was, who would never make her feel like she needed to earn her place in their hearts, Sophia closed her eyes and smiled. She'd started this journey as a woman who'd lost everything. Her marriage, her home, her sense of self, even her belief in her own worth. She was ending it as a woman who'd gained something infinitely more valuable. A love built on truth, a family created from choice rather than obligation, and the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly enough, exactly as she was. The rain continued to fall against the hospital windows, washing the city clean for whatever came next. And in room 247, a family that had been forged from heartbreak and hope settled into their first night together, complete at last. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that your worth isn't determined by people who can't see your value, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because every ending is really just a new beginning, and every woman deserves a love story that builds her up instead of tearing her down. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply living so well that the people who tried to diminish you become irrelevant to your happiness. And sometimes, just sometimes, The fairy tale ending you thought was impossible is exactly the one you were meant to have all along. If this story reminded you that your worth isn't determined by people who can't see your value, please hit that like button right now. And subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another empowering tale from Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives.